Ever feel like you're trying to put together like a 1,000-piece puzzle, but the picture keeps changing while you're working on it? It's kind of what it feels like figuring out your identity these days, right? And that's exactly what we're diving into today.
I like that analogy.
We've got excerpts from Identity Reimagined to guide us. And let me tell you, this book is packed with insights on not just surviving, but really thriving in the middle of all this, well, this crazy evolution happening all around us.
Yeah, what I found fascinating is how the book positions identity, that understanding of who you are, as a superpower. Like, in a world overflowing with information and choices, that inner compass is more crucial than ever, right?
Right. It's like, remember back when we only had a handful of TV channels, everyone kind of absorbed the same narrative, but now endless streams of content, perspectives, even ways to design our digital selves. It's exhilarating, but it can also feel like you're being pulled in a million directions at once.
Exactly. And that's where Identity Reimagined really hits home. It's not just about accepting this change. It's about actively, shaping your place within it. The book argues that when you really get a handle on your values, your passions, what you really want out of life, those become the driving force behind the choices you make, instead of letting those external pressures dictate who you should be.
Which brings us to the internet, that double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's totally shattered the old monoculture, given a voice to so many who were never heard before. But on the other hand, we've got this pressure cooker of social media where everyone's trying to curate the perfect online persona. How do we navigate that authentically?
That's where the book's focus on self-discovery comes in. It's about being able to distinguish between, external validation, those likes and follows, and internal understanding. Tools like Jim Quick's Superhero You prompt, for example, they encourage that inward reflection.
Okay, I love that analogy. So walk me through this. How does tapping into our inner superhero help us define our real-world identities?
Well, imagine you could have any superpower, right? What would you choose? And more importantly, why? Would you want superhuman strength to protect the vulnerable? Maybe the power of telekinesis to create art that inspires.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
It pushes you beyond just listing traits. It forces you to consider the impact you want to have on the world, those deeper values and desires that make you you.
That's brilliant. It's like suddenly you're not just listing adjectives, you're crafting your own superhero origin story.
Yeah.
And that reveals a lot about your core values. And the book argues that those values, when you genuinely understand them, become your guiding principles.
Right. Precisely. And Identity Reimagined provides practical exercises to help you pinpoint those values. Take Christina Carlson's values inventory, for instance. It prompts you to go beyond simply saying, oh, I value creativity, and instead articulate why that value resonates with you and how it manifests in different areas of your life.
This idea of aligning your actions with your values really resonates, especially when you consider Christina Carlson's values inventory. It's one thing to say you value creativity, but it's a whole other level to actually examine how that value influences your choices, from the career you pursue to the way you decorate your living room.
It's about, connecting those dots inside yourself and then seeing how they play out in your everyday life, because when what you do actually reflects what you believe, that's when you unlock a whole new level of authenticity,
And influence, too, wouldn't you say? Because authenticity, that's magnetic. People can spot a fake a mile away, but when you're genuinely in tune with who you are, it just shines through.
Exactly. And this doesn't just apply to us as individuals. Identity Reimagined also spends a good amount of time on the importance of organizational identity, especially now with all this crazy technological advancement happening.
And this is where things get really interesting, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not just about personal growth anymore.
Yeah.
It's about the survival of entire companies.
Yeah.
The book uses Kodak as a cautionary tale, am I right? The photography giant basically invented the digital camera, but totally failed to adapt when the digital revolution came along. What happened there?
It's a classic example of a company holding on too tightly to an outdated identity. Kodak was so stuck in the world of physical film that they just couldn't wrap their heads around a future where that wasn't the core of their business. And the thing is, they had the innovation. They were the ones who actually invented the first digital camera, but they just didn't have the imagination, the willingness to really embrace it, to reimagine their place in that new digital landscape.
It's wild, right? They were so busy looking back at their legacy that they totally missed the train to the future, even though they were the ones who built the darn thing. So how do companies avoid becoming the next Kodak? How do they build that culture of adaptability that allows them to thrive in a world where, like we keep saying, the only constant is change?
The book argues that it's not enough to just say you're innovative, you know? You have to be willing to actually dismantle the structures that aren't serving you anymore, to step into a future that might look radically different from your past.
You need to recognize when your superhero origin story needs a reboot to stay relevant. Which, hey, that leads us to Dress X, right? That story totally blew my mind. A company that sells entirely digital clothing. What year are we living in?
It's pretty wild, right? And the rise of digital fashion is a fascinating example of how technology is blurring the lines between our physical and digital selves. The founders of Dress X, Natalia Modanova and Daria Shapovalova, they tapped into this growing desire for self-expression in the virtual world. And it's not just about avatars and video games anymore. This is impacting social media, online meetings, even the metaverse.
Remember that Barclay's study mentioned in the book, it found that 9% of clothes that people buy using credit cards are literally just for social media content. And then they return them. That's insane. That's a crazy amount of waste just to maintain a certain image online.
And that's another layer to the Dress X story that I find so fascinating. They're offering a sustainable alternative to fast fashion. With digital clothing, you can experiment with all these crazy styles, defy the laws of physics, and you don't have to worry about contributing to textile waste. It's a win-win for fashion and the environment.
Speaking of fashion, you mentioned trying on some of this digital clothing yourself, your metaverse talk, right? What was that experience like?
You know, it was actually pretty eye-opening. Even though it was a virtual dress, I found myself like going through the same mental gymnastics as I would with a real one. Does this color look good on me? Does this style, you know, actually reflect my personality? Am I comfortable showing this much digital skin?
See, I never even thought about it like that. It's amazing how these choices we make, even in the digital realm, can reveal so much about who we are deep down.
It just shows how deeply ingrained those choices are with our sense of self, whether it's our physical self or our virtual one. But on a more serious note, Identity Reimagined also digs into how identity plays a role in some pretty unexpected areas, like counterterrorism, for example.
Okay, now that's a plot twist I did not see coming.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
So we've got Priyank Mathur, founder of Mythos Labs. He's a former counterterrorism expert, but he's also a comedian at heart. And what did he do? He brought those two worlds together and decided to fight extremism with humor.
Wait, really? Fighting terrorism with jokes?
Yeah.
That sounds so counterintuitive, but also kind of genius.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, that moment in a superhero movie where the hero suddenly realizes that their real strength isn't actually their powers.
Right, right.
It's more about like who they are at their core, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of getting to the core, Identity Reimagined actually offers some really practical tools for exploring those different layers of ourselves, like Robert Dilts' neurological levels framework. Have you heard of that?
Break that down for me. What are neurological levels and how can they help us understand our own identity?
Okay, so imagine like a pyramid, right?
Okay, got it.
At the bottom, you've got your environment, those physical and social structures around you.
Makes sense.
Then, moving up, you have your behaviors, how you act, how you react to things. Then your skills and capabilities, what you're good at. And then we get to your values and beliefs.
Okay, so far so good.
And at the very top of the pyramid, that's your identity, that sense of self.
So it's like each level builds on the one below it.
Exactly.
And if you understand these different layers, you can start to see where things might be misaligned in your life.
Precisely. So say you're feeling kind of stuck or unfulfilled in your career, right?
Right.
Dilt's model would say, look at each level. Is it your environment, maybe a toxic workplace that's dragging you down, or maybe your values aren't lining up with the company's mission anymore?
It's like a diagnostic tool for your life, you know?
Yeah.
It helps you pinpoint the root cause of an issue, not just slap a Band-Aid on the symptoms.
Exactly. And once you've figured out where the misalignment is, then you can actually start making intentional shifts.
So bringing it back to this idea of identity as a superpower, it sounds like these tools, these frameworks, they're not just about understanding who we are. They're about using that knowledge to navigate this ever-changing world around us.
Absolutely. We're not just passive bystanders here. We have the power to shape our own identities, our own stories, our own futures.
It's like we're all authors of our own superhero origin stories, right? Kind of constantly evolving, rewriting ourselves to meet the demands of a world that's more dynamic and interconnected than ever before.
And I think that leads us beautifully to that final thought-provoking question from Identity Reimagined. What parts of your identity, those parts that maybe you haven't fully explored yet? What are you most excited to express in the years ahead?
It's a question that invites us to dream big. I love that. To embrace the unknown. To look at the future with a sense of wonder and curiosity. And isn't that what having a superpower is all about, really? To use it to explore, to grow, to make a difference.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Because when we truly understand and embrace our own identities, we don't just navigate change. We unlock the potential to shape it, to create a world that's more aligned with our values and what we want to see.
So there you have it, listeners, our deep dive into the power of identity in a world that just doesn't stop changing. We've explored the impact on us as individuals and on entire organizations, unpacked fascinating examples like DressX and Mythos Labs, and even given you some practical tools to start your own journey of self-discovery.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have. But remember, your identity, that's your superpower. It's up to you to use it wisely. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep imagining the amazing possibilities out there. That's all for this deep dive.